The show starts with Sydney, a teenager, walking down the center of the street, soaked in what appears to be blood. Flashback to a few weeks ago, the school's guidance counselor, Ms. Capriotti, gives Sydney a diary and encourages her to write in it as a way to manage her emotions. Sydney has been struggling with her temper, and Ms. Capriotti believes journaling might help her cope with the grief of losing her father last spring. In her diary, Sydney writes about her best friend Dina, who she describes as a total badass. She admits she never would have imagined someone like Dina wanting to be friends with her, if not for the fact that they both moved to Pennsylvania around the same time. Dina was by Sydney's side when she learned about her father, who died by suicide. They cried together that day, but since then, Dina has always found a way to make her smile. Later, they head to Fiddle's Diner, where Sydney's mom, Maggie, usually works. While they eat, Dina excitedly tells Sydney that Brad Lewis, the most attractive guy in school, asked her to homecoming and that she gave him her virginity. The news unsettles Sydney, but she keeps quiet. Just then, Brad shows up and asks Sydney to get us free burgers, but she tells him her mom isn't working that day. Annoyed by his constant talking, Sydney glares at him, silently wishing he'd stop. In that instant, Brad's nose suddenly starts to bleed. As she walks home, Sydney wonders if she somehow caused the nosebleed in her mind. She tries to push away her discomfort about Dina and Brad's relationship, reminding herself how much she values Dina's friendship and doesn't want to lose it. Her thoughts are cut off when Stanley Barber, the boy who lives down the street, calls out to her. He invites her over to his place to listen to some old tracks on his vinyl sometime. Sydney agrees and gets home to the small house she shares with her mom, Maggie, and younger brother Liam. Later, she checks in with Liam, who says he's already done his homework. Then he tells her about how a bully named Richard Reinard punched a kid in the face and how he's scared he might be next. To protect himself, Liam is designing a suit of armor. He proudly shows Sydney a sketch, and she tells him it's one of his best designs yet. That night, Sydney looks at the pimples on her thigh and tries to remove them. However, she becomes irritated by the constant dripping of a leaky faucet. In frustration, she tells it to stop, and to her astonishment, the dripping actually stops. When her mom finally returns from work, she sits beside Sydney on the couch. We learn that they've never spoken about her father since his death. Sydney tells her mom that she was called into the school counselor's office. The counselor suggested she needed a way to express herself, and that Sydney might feel unloved by the people she cares about. Her mom just casually replies that she must be setting her eyes too high. Hurt by her mother's response, Sydney retreats to her room. She writes about how her mom can be cruel sometimes, and how she believes her father would have understood her in ways her mother doesn't. But now that he's gone, she feels deeply alone. As her emotions rise and she feels like she's about to explode, she suddenly hears a loud crash behind her. The next morning, Sydney inspects the crack in the wall from the night before. She covers it with her dresser to avoid being caught. However, she's still unsure whether her outburst caused it or if the house is just falling apart due to poor construction. At school, Sydney asks Dina if she can give her a ride after classes so she can run a grocery errand. Dina apologizes, saying she promised Brad she'd go to the pep rally with him and stay for the game. Feeling brushed aside, Sydney walks alone along the train tracks. Frustrated that Dina bailed on her for Brad while she's stuck figuring out how to take groceries home, she throws rocks at a nearby railroad crossing sign, trying to hit it. Suddenly, the entire sign breaks free from the ground and flies several feet away. Startled, Sydney looks around nervously, checking to see if anyone witnessed what just happened. In the next scene, Sydney heads to the bowling alley where Stan works and asks if she can borrow his car. He hesitates, explaining that he can't lend it out because his dad doesn't even know he's using it himself. As Sydney turns to leave, clearly frustrated, Stan changes his mind and offers to drive her instead. They then head to the store together. At the checkout, Sydney realizes she's short on cash as her mom had only given her $50, and it's not enough. Stan offers to cover the rest, but Sydney insists on handling it herself. Frustrated, she returns to the shelves to put back some items. She reflects on how everything's gone wrong, her mom barely giving her enough money, Dina blowing her off for Brad, and the cashier looking at her like she's a failure. Trying to stay composed, she attempts to keep her cool, but it doesn't work. Suddenly, several items from a nearby shelf fall to the floor, as if knocked over by an invisible force. Startled by the noise from the shelves, Stan rushes over to check on Sydney. He tries to ease her distress and brings her back to his room, where they get high. Feeling relaxed and playful, they start a game of Would You Rather. After a few light-hearted questions, Stan turns more serious and asks if she would rather tell him her would you rather tell the deepest, darkest secret or, before he can finish the alternative, Sydney cuts in and says she'll tell him but only if he promises to keep it a secret. Stan swears to keep it between them. Sydney hesitates, thinking about revealing her power, but instead blurts out that she has pimples on her thighs. Stan laughs and jokingly asks if he can see them. She declines, and in response, Stan takes off his shirt and shows her his back. Turns out he has a serious case of acne that he says even goes down to his butt. He then claims he's won the gross out contest. Not one to be outdone, Sydney stands up, lowers her pants, and shows him her thighs, insisting her situation is worse. The pair get caught up in the moment, and Stan leans in and kisses Sydney. He pulls back for a second to ask if what he did was okay, but instead of answering, Sydney kisses him again. The next morning, Sydney and Dina are having breakfast together at Fiddles. During their conversation, Sydney tells Dina that she slept with Stan. Curious, Dina presses for details, so Sydney lies saying it was amazing, even though it had actually been awkward and left her feeling off. Dina then brings up Ricky Berry, Brad's best friend, who was hosting a party that night, saying she and Brad were supposed to go. However, Brad injured his ankle in the last football match, so she doubts he'll want to. Sydney is surprised that Dina got invited to such a popular party. When Dina says she might skip it, Sydney jumps in and offers to go with her instead. Dina agrees, and they plan to meet later that night at 7. That evening, when Sydney walks Liam home from school, they come across a group of kids playing nearby. Liam suddenly suggests they take a longer route by the train tracks. When Sydney questions why, he quietly admits that Richard Reinhardt is up ahead. Not one to back down, Sydney marches over to Richard and firmly tells him to stop bothering her brother. Richard mockingly agrees, then calls her a freak once she turns her back. Irritated, Sydney tries to do something with her mind, but nothing happens. Frustrated, she lashes out verbally, telling Richard that his life will eventually amount to nothing, that he'll be stuck in the same place forever, and won't even have a dog to keep him company. She then walks off while giving him the double middle finger. Liam, however, doesn't seem impressed by her outburst. Back at home, Liam asks if they can do a puzzle together. Sid realizes the puzzles are in the basement, the same place where their dad took his own life, and a space she hasn't entered since. After a pause, she tells Liam to wait while she goes down. In the basement, memories flood her mind. Her dad and Liam doing puzzles on Sundays, how he never left a note, and how her mother found him. The emotions slowly catch up with her and the room begins to tremble. The shaking continues until a loud crash is heard from above, followed by Liam's scream. Panicked, Sydney rushes upstairs. Liam is standing there, holding his dead hedgehog Banana in his hands. They decide to honor him and hold a small funeral in their backyard. Back inside, Sydney is still feeling shaken as memories of her dad floods her mind. She then notices things on her dresser and suddenly, they start to float. Surprised, she quickly turns around and the items fall back down. She calmly puts everything back in place and then writes in her diary, admitting she thinks things might be slipping out of her control. Later, Sydney and Dina arrive at Ricky's party. They dance, play games, and have a good time until Brad shows up. He approaches Dina and asks her to hang out with him. Dina does not hesitate and leaves Sydney behind right away. Later, Stan finds Sydney shooting hoops alone outside. Taking the chance, he asks her to homecoming. She says yes, even though deep down she's torn, wondering if she should just be honest and admit she doesn't feel the same way about him. Sydney heads back inside and finds Dina alone, curled up in bed and crying. She lies down beside her and gently asks what's wrong. Dina explains she had a huge fight with Brad. Sydney tries to lighten the mood and says that Dina's stuck with her now. Then, she leans in and kisses her. She then suddenly realizes the reason she doesn't like Stan is because she likes Dina. Sadly, Dina pulls away and insists they're just drunk. Feeling embarrassed, Sydney tells her that Stan's giving her a ride home and quickly slips out of the room. She then crosses the street without paying attention and nearly gets hit by Stan's car. She walks into the woods and stops to catch her breath. Frustrated, she lets out a sharp fuck so forcefully that a couple of nearby trees crash to the ground. Stan gets out to check and suddenly he hears Sydney scream and sees trees crashing down. Stunned, Stan asks how she did that. Sydney tries to cover it up, claiming the trees were already like that when she arrived, but Stan insists he saw everything. Sydney then asks him to keep it a secret and walks away. In the next scene, our heroine ventures deeper into the woods, eventually resting in an old, abandoned wooden house. The next morning, Sydney arrives at school and forces herself to act normal. Stan tries to talk to her, but she slips into the girls' bathroom to avoid him. During chemistry, Stan keeps trying to bring up what he saw, but Sydney dodges him until she can't anymore. He suggests they test her power. The thought upsets her, and suddenly the test tubes on the table start shaking and bubbling. Before it gets worse, Sydney excuses herself and rushes to the bathroom. Later that night, Sydney visits Stan at his workplace and apologizes to him. She then agrees to test her power as suggested by him. Stan challenges her to focus and try to knock down some pins, a tower of soda cans, and even pop popcorn with her power. Sydney tries her best, but sadly fails at all of it. They both pause and think back to Ricky's party when Sydney actually unleashed her power. She admits she kissed someone there, which makes Stan look a little sad. He asks if it was before or after he asked her to homecoming. He thought they were together because they'd slept together, and it was the first time for him. Sydney says it was her first time too, but the kiss she gave was to someone who didn't want it, and usually, her powers flare up when she's angry, embarrassed, or scared. Stan comes up with an idea and starts teasing her. He says maybe she wasn't kissed back because she's incredibly angry and repulsive. Sydney smirks, knowing exactly what he's doing. He pushes further, joking she'll fail biology and never figure out what's going on inside her, and that it'll eat her up from the inside out. By now, Sydney is already feeling it. The bowling balls behind her start to shift and roll, but Stan keeps going. He hits her where it hurts, saying she has a terrible family, and her dad didn't even leave a note, so she'll never know why he killed himself. This becomes the last straw for her. Sydney snaps and 2 bowling balls shoot across the room, crashing into the wall behind Stan. Stan's amazed and praises her, but Sydney is completely furious. She yells at him, saying she could have killed him, then storms out. She then walks along the train tracks, unaware that a shadowy black figure is watching her from a distance. The next day during an exam, Brad leans toward Dina, asking if he can copy her paper. The teacher catches them and gives both Brad and Dina detention. Sydney speaks up, saying it's unfair that Dina worked so hard but now might fail and get detention because of Brad. She calls it bullshit and ends up getting detention too for her language. Then, Stan stands up and intentionally causes a scene. He insists he wants detention with Sydney. As a result, Sydney, Brad, Dinah, and another classmate Jenny get called in the gym. Mr. Whitaker, the principal, tells them they have to scrape gum off the bleachers until 7 p.m. During break, Sydney heads to the library. Suddenly, the lights start flickering around her, but she isn't causing it. She calls out, hoping someone will answer, but the room stays silent. She returns to the gym and calls Stan to meet her outside. She then leads him into the library and shows him the chaos. Shelves knocked over and books scattered everywhere. Stan jokes they'll need a carpenter or some kind of miracle to fix it all, but Sydney says the real problem isn't the mess, it's the security camera footage. The incident was recorded, so they need to get their hands on the video from the principal's office. They hatch a plan to grab the janitor's keys and sneak into the office without getting caught by Mr. Whitaker. To keep Mr. Whitaker busy, they set off a microwave burrito explosion as a distraction. Thankfully, their plan works, and they're able to retrieve the footage. Later in the bathroom, Sydney overhears Brad and Jenny talking about their hookup at Ricky's party. Brad begs Sydney to keep it quiet, but Dina walks in, so Sydney spills the truth. Dina then immediately ends things with Brad. After their detention, Stan asks Sydney what really happened in the library. She admits she felt like someone was following her and swears she wasn't alone, and that what went down wasn't her doing. When they arrive home, Sydney and Stan watch the stolen footage over and over until Sydney finally snaps. He reassures her, saying if she truly feels like someone was there and then vanished, he believes her. Later, during a session with Ms. Capriotti, Sydney shares that she thinks someone has been following her. Ms. Capriotti asks if the figure resembled Sydney's father. Sydney replies that her dad's been dead for a while, but Ms. Capriotti says she once saw her grandmother after she had died. She explains these are called grief hallucinations, signs that Sydney is still grieving and might need something from her father, like closure. Sydney thinks Ms. Capriotti might be right. Maybe she does need closure. When she returns home, she heads down to the basement and searches for answers about her dad's suicide. Under a shelf, she finds a locked steel box. Using her power, she opens it and discovers a Marine uniform, a medal, and a set of dog tags that belong to her father. Just as Sydney is going through the dog tags, her mom, Maggie, walks into the room. She starts to share how, shortly after they got married, Sydney's dad enlisted in the Marines. Over the years, the things he witnessed and experienced began to take a heavy toll on him. Maggie explains that after his final deployment, they tried to move forward, but he was never the same. He would always say that no one could understand what he was going through. He became so paranoid that he genuinely believed someone was following him. Maggie recalls how an explosion during his last tour wiped out everyone except him, a trauma he never recovered from. Overwhelmed by what she's just learned, Sydney desperately wants to write down her feelings in her diary. She reaches into her bag but can't find it. Turns out her diary is missing. She suddenly realizes that whoever took it already knows about her secret. At the homecoming party, Sydney and Dina spend the night dancing and enjoying themselves. Their precious moment is suddenly broken when the announcement for the homecoming king and queen begins. As the homecoming king starts his speech, Brad abruptly grabs the microphone from him and takes over. He holds up Sydney's diary for everyone to see and exposes her secrets to the entire crowd. He starts by spilling the most personal details: that Sydney kissed Dina at Ricky's party, that she's in love with Dina, struggles with her father's issues, and that everyone around her thinks she's broken. Stan rushes forward to defend Sydney, telling Brad to back off, but Brad punches him in the face. Brad continues with his speech and tells everyone that there is something very strange about Sydney that everyone should know. Our heroine is overcome with embarrassment and just wishes him to stop. Before Brad can reveal more, something horrifying happens. His head suddenly explodes, splattering blood over the crowd, including Sydney. His headless body collapses to the floor, horrifying everyone. This terrifying moment cuts to the opening scene of the show. Sydney, dazed and blood-covered, wandering absent-mindedly down the middle of the street, she flees into the woods, making her way to the old abandoned cabin she'd visited before. There, she contemplates running so far away no one can find her. Then, from the shadows, a mysterious figure emerges. Sydney asks him quietly if she should be afraid. He cryptically answers, "They should be afraid." Let's begin. Don't forget to subscribe, and if this video hits 200 comments or 2,000 likes, I'll drop the next part where Sydney's powers get even more dangerous.